Hello, hello, and welcome to the final list of our 2017 list season. My top 5 manga of 2017. Uh, Compared to the top 15s we did for anime and albums and the top 25 we did for songs, this seems a little short. The reason why is that, so for like the anime list, if I offended any like Handshakers fans by not putting it on the list and kind of making fun of it, I don't really care so much. Not just because I don't think there's many of you out there, it's that your continued support and enjoyment of my channel isn't necessarily based on me continuing to like Handshakers. And don't get me wrong, there's none of the manga that I'm currently reading that I dislike. If there was a series that I just straight up disliked, I would drop it entirely. But I think it kind of creates a perception if I did like my top 15 favorite series, that the few series that we regularly read that are being left off, I don't know, I wouldn't feel good about it. I feel like it would take away from the fact that for each and every series we read, while we're reading it, I want to treat it as if it's like one of my favorites. I want to treat it with the full investment and emotional impact that I'm able to give it. And so I don't want to create needless hierarchies and orderings and such when, for the most part, we can just kind of enjoy them all as equal. But that said, I think once we've had so many 2017 lists, it would feel very odd to not at least talk about some manga that I thought really stood out last year. So these are 5 series that I think went above and beyond, and that I was really um, much more moved by than I expected in this last year. Not necessarily based on their entire run, nor is it entirely based on just the chapters in this year, but some combination thereof. Just the amount that I was like impressed by them in this year. So the first one, as you can see, is One Punch Man. So last year we had chapters 70 to 84 of the remake. And if you had kind of told me what had happened in them at the start of last year, or more to the point, what hadn't happened in them, i.e., we hadn't really started the Monster Association arc, I would have been disappointed. I would have been maybe a little annoyed that the series was progressing so slowly. But what we got instead, all of this original content that one came up with specifically for Murata to draw in the remake, has been so fantastic and has done such an amazing job of playing to Murata's strengths that I have absolutely no place to complain whatsoever. Especially like the Garo fights, this much more deliberate buildup of Garo as a character and as a threat, by seeing him fight all of these different heroes and hero teams and monsters and everything. More and more, you just get the sense that um, I don't know. It's like in the original series, there was kind of this novelty of Garo as like the human monster in the webcomic, but then in the remake, he's kind of being built up as this antithesis to Saitama all the more. Like that we see the struggle and the agonizing by a millimeter victories that he pulls out again and again and again, as a real contrast to Saitama, who just punches through everything. Of course, many of the highlights of last year were still Saitama punching through everything, like at the conclusion of the Tsuru Gotetsu fight, which was just mind-boggling. And then, of course, the real highlight, the reason that this made my list in the first place, the insane, like, movie-length chapter that he put out at the end of last year, chapter 84, which was what, like 117 pages of superbly drawn shonen fighting action, climaxing, of course, and I don't think this is a spoiler, with Saitama punching right through the entire centipede. Oh, glorious, just absolutely glorious. Here we see Murata really finding, I think, his place among the all-time shonen greats when it comes to that essential art of the fight scene. So even though we didn't get the Monster Association arc that I wanted, the amount of hype that we've built up for it about the monsters and Garo and the other elements, the S-Class heroes as well, the whole situation with waiting a few days before the raid, this build-up and stuff, has made me all the more excited for it. Even though I've been so eager and I've been hoping for it for like many years now to see it in glorious Murata art. I'm more than happy waiting another year if the build-up is going to continue being this fantastic. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is this one, My Unrequited Love, which in Japanese translates better. I talked to my friend about what the title really means. Tatoe todokana. This is like thread. Tato shitemo. And it's sort of like these feelings that won't reach, but the way it's grammatically structured is sort of talking about the feelings as if it's sort of like already the subject of conversation, if you know what I mean. Um, a position where you're kind of already saying something else about these feelings that are unreachable, which I think is very, very suited for not just the content, but the tone of the story. So the premise here, if you haven't been reading it, it's a Yuri series about this girl, Uta-chan, who at the day of her brother's wedding falls head over heels in love with his brother's bride. And it immediately sets up this situation of just intense emotional roadblock where it's impossible for her to get to the scenario that she wants to. It's impossible for the love that she feels to be reciprocated in the way that she feels. And yet we see in this deep, meaningful, personal detail just how these feelings manifest and how she reaches out to try to realize it in some fashion. I found this story extremely compelling. The character is extremely relatable and understandable, and just this sort of thoroughness and investigation of the situation and of other people's experiences, and the fact that none of the characters were demonized to make anything easier. Nobody was relegated to some kind of troped, one-dimensional role in order to facilitate the plot. Everyone was more expansive and more complex than the situation mandated. And it really kind of lent the whole thing this realism and this feeling of possibility. Like, I felt desperately that I wanted to know how things were going to be resolved from this situation of total emotional. Before I said roadblock, now I'm going to say logjam. And maybe I'm going to run out of metaphorical sayings for the exact same thing, but you know what I'm talking about. Really beautifully illustrated too, and just wonderful that TMNR, who got their career started doing Love Live Dojinshi that I really enjoyed, how now has this serialized, published in Tankobon series that is so fantastic. Um, I really recommend anyone who's a fan of Yuri to check it out, or just a fan of kind of very psychologically real romance stories in general. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Good stuff. Okay, next I want to talk about Attack on Titan. Attack on Titan had a fantastic 2017, I thought. The series has gone up and down for me over the years. You know, at the beginning I was totally enthralled, and then some of the kind of arcs in the middle, I just couldn't get caught up in as much. It was kind of like the freshness of the premise was waning, and kind of the more complex issues didn't really enthrall me as like the primal mysteries of the series did. But now, last year, really finally addressing those primal, fundamental mysteries of the series, and doing so in a way that isn't just like an information dump, isn't just exposition. Although there's a bit of that, and it was very satisfying and conclusive, but more through this long extended flashback showing the three traitor characters, Reiner and Annie and Bertolt, when they were first deployed to the island, and how they infiltrated, and seeing all of those pivotal scenes from the beginning, the ones that really got me caught up in the series to begin with, mirrored, seeing the other side of them, seeing their perspective and having their formerly villainous antagonist roles so deeply humanized, I thought was just so beautiful and so impressive that I don't know, it made everything worth it. There was a scene in one of the latest chapters where they return to the present day, and they show Reiner kind of feeling really down and out and contemplating ending his life, thinking about this kind of horrific legacy that he's been a part of, and seeing that kind of full circle when he's talking to the latest recruits of their army, the people that are trying their hardest to inherit his Titan's powers, and just that kind of dizzying perspective where suddenly you see the whole picture, not just in terms of the history of the series or why there's Titans, why there's the walls, whatever, but the emotional circle of the series really came into view for me in the first time, and all of these questions of duty and honor and obsession and objective and all of these things like kind of shone in a new light. And I was just so impressed with the mastery of storytelling on display. Like, I feel like this was something that the author had in mind throughout the entire run of the series. That everything would be building to this one moment, this one kind of perspective shift, this one change. And I think, it had that sense of purpose, that how do I put this? Like, it wasn't just kind of he had been written into a corner. It wasn't just resolving the plot for the sake of itself. It was that the whole premise of the series could be recontextualized as a motivation to get to this kind of emotional state. Do you know what I mean? And I think this is like the most powerful part of any fantasy series. When you realize that it's not a story about Titans and people that can turn into Titans, but that it's a story about these themes, about these emotional, psychological themes that we find in ourselves today. Um, that kind of purpose behind it that's only revealed after such a long time and after seeing so many perspectives, I think is just so fantastic. And then moving from that into the crazy and frantic setups for the next arc, setting up what could even be like the final arc of the series, I'm tempted to think, in terms of just how few major things are kind of left to deal with. I think was also just masterfully done, and gave me a real sense of anticipation for that I don't know. Yeah, yeah. I feel more involved with the series than I have been in a long time, on the strength of that last fantastic year. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is something a little different. It's kind of almost the reverse process of what I think happened in Attack on Titan. So where in Attack on Titan, we kind of had the premise as a way to convey the emotional themes. Here we have something where the premise kind of fought against the emotional themes, and that out of kind of love for the characters, I would say, a whole new emotional spectrum was developed. And I'm talking about Watamotei. It's not my fault that I'm not popular. This last year in Watamotei, we had a real profound transformation of Tomoko as a character. And maybe I shouldn't say transformation. That's maybe not the right word. Because it wasn't like she changed that fundamentally. It wasn't like she became this totally unrecognizable person. But she finally hit a sweet spot where she was actually able to engage with her peers, make friends, grow as a person, And now in this fantastic Disneyland arc has basically assembled like a Yuri harem around herself. So that's miles and miles from sitting alone at lunch, and just the overall arc of this series, I think, is so unique and wonderful. That it started basically as a joke at Tomoko's expense. You know, it was making fun of her character and how socially inept she was, and it was kind of this cringe comedy of everything going wrong whenever she tried to realize one of her bizarre and usually fairly misanthropic dreams. But as she kind of got to know her classmates, and as we, the readers, got to know her, it felt too cruel to kind of continue on with our bullying, one-dimensional view of Tomoko as this outcast. And conversely, it seemed unreasonable that Tomoko could continue looking out at the world with the same kind of simple, reductive, antagonizing view. And as a result, um, they kind of honored this progression. They, out of love for the character, they let her have friends. They let her grow. They let her be able to join social situations that she wouldn't have been able to dream of years ago. Um, and I can't think of many examples of a manga series even attempting this, let alone pulling it off so well. Usually we see kind of the opposite, a Flandersization of characters, to use the TV tropes term, where once the initial joke kind of runs out of steam, they have to keep pushing the characters into more and more extreme situations, and they become these kind of crazy parodies of themselves in order to kind of keep up the shock of the initial joke. But here they kind of gambled and on the trust and on the love that people were showing for the character in her basic essence, not as kind of this walking joke, but as an actual human being, as an actual character, and decided to kind of move away from the initial cringe comedy that really motivated the series. It's still a comedy, there's still jokes, but they're not always at Tomoko's expense. And they're not always the nightmarish train wrecks of social blunder after social blunder that they used to be. I think we actually went almost the entire year without a chapter that ends with the what used to be the common gag of Tomoko basically mind broken from despair, and the entire class looking on with shock and horror at whatever it was that she screwed up and did. It's a redemption year, you know? And all of these characters that used to be just kind of one-dimensional and antagonistic because we were seeing them from Tomoko's eyes have really blossomed and bloomed into their own complex, multi-dimensional beings with, you know, hopes and fears and shortcomings and their own little bits of awkwardness. I think Yuri specifically, I am so impressed with that character. The idea that, you know, even though Tomoko was kind of the attention-getting loner and loser, the one that was always in the center of these extreme social train wrecks, there was this other girl that also didn't have any friends, that also wasn't popular, that also felt herself distanced and removed from the goings-on of the rest of the class. And of course, we wouldn't really notice her, because why would Tomoko ever notice a girl like that? It just wouldn't fit with her character back then. But slowly we've built up these relationships. We've actually come to understand her place in this class all along. It's really kind of beautiful in a way, that all along there was another girl that was kind of suffering in the same way, and that she too now has the warmth of community, that she too has friends. It's really fantastic, and I hope that people see this as kind of an inspirational story. That I think a lot of the big fan base that this series got, especially at first, were people that could really relate to Tomoko. That their interest and their otakudom and their degeneracy was just at odds with society at large. And Japan takes a very kind of hopeless viewpoint to such things, a real kind of shogunai attitude, That if you are like a weird person, you probably are just going to be a weird person forever, and you should embrace your loneliness and embrace your isolation, which is kind of a brutally pessimistic attitude, although it might be seen as kind of a kindness and realness. Um, Here, I think they offer a path to friendship and community that doesn't at all feel unrealistic and doesn't feel dishonest to yourself. It just sort of highlights that with a few small adjustments to how you deal with people and being a little more open-minded about the people around you and the possibility to be friends with them, things just burst open. Like, just the smallest change and what could have been an unpleasant, uh, awkward, like otaku type of person can have friends, can fit in, can be seen as normal enough. I feel like I'm proof of that. Like, I have lots of very degenerate interests and passions and kind of otaku type things, right? Like I have a manga reading channel. Like that's very, very nerdy. But I have friends. I feel confident in social situations. I can get along with people. And it's just an attitude thing. Like I think it's just an openness to it. Um, and I feel like this wasn't always the case with me. Like I used to be very annoying to people, and I used to have a hard time making friends because I didn't really understand the pacing of friendship and the pacing of social interaction, and um, I didn't really realize that it wasn't about just dumping all of the information I had about all of my interests on them immediately, or self-deprecating to the point like kind of the extreme opposite of self-deprecating and hiding myself away from them. But eventually you learn that there's this give and take and there's this kind of flow to learning about each other that it's not even a question of mastering it, but as long as you're willing to kind of go along with that flow, anyone can make friends. I really believe that. And everyone deserves friends too. I think that very much. And people deserve more than just kind of pitying obligatory friends, but you deserve to try and maybe struggle and maybe suffer, just like Tomoko did, in order to get friends that you can really be friends with, that you can really have a relationship with. I don't know. I was really moved by this series last year. I never would have guessed when I was first reading it that it would go through this sort of arc of such beautiful humanization and just the fact that she has friends now, and the title is not at all accurate anymore, but I couldn't be happier about it. Okay, the last one I wanted to talk about, my number one series of last year, has to be, of course, Mob Psycho. Oh, oh man, we went through a couple fairly substantial arcs last year, leading up to the finale, which happened right at the end of last year. We had the end of the Broccoli arc, which was kind of sad, with Dimple's great sacrifice, and really showed kind of the limit of Mob fighting these external forces, basically fighting this supreme manifestation of his own power externalized and mirrored back in this sort of ugly form that wanted all of the material things, wanted goddom, wanted a cult of followers, wanted kind of the extreme versions of Mob's initial goals of friendship and stuff. Actually, it's sort of similar to Watamotei in this arc of social realization and such, that following that, we have Mob making some genuine memories, hanging out with the Telepathy Club, trying to summon the UFO successfully. Such a kind of light-hearted, free-spirited, wacky arc that felt so strangely appropriate in the end game of this series. That after the stakes had been rising so much, so steadily throughout all of his battles, that one of the final things he does is this wonderful little group adventure to another planet. I think that panel where the UFO finally shows up, it was just so shocking because it really misled you into one of those, well, the friendship we gained was the real adventure, and it's more about the memories we made and the failure than our actual succeeding. But then they just succeeded and the aliens really showed up. It was so goofy, but so heartwarming at the same time. But then the final arc, the one that we all should have seen coming, addressing one of the most fundamental mysteries. I feel like I say fundamental mystery like at least once every video. I think I've said it like 3 times this video. But addressing this question of where do mobs' powers come from? What is this question marks percent? What happens when the powers fully take over? And really drilling down into the basis of Mob's character and wondering, you know, this entire arc of Mob, like the series-wide arc of Mob wanting to improve his body and not rely on his psychic powers and become an interesting, sociable person. How does that conflict with the fact that in the end he does have these powers, that he is an extremely powerful psychic, and that there is this entity within himself? And of course, I don't need to get into the amazing crisis of introspection and mob versus mob that unfolds, and the wonderful way they brought back so many characters in their vain attempts to stop him, each of them kind of signifying another step he had taken as a person, but that were all insufficient to address this deep, cleaving dichotomy within himself. And the resolution, oh man, because that's a hard thing to write, I think. To have a series that, even though it has all of these fun adventures and all of these wacky characters and all these great action scenes, that the fundamental point of the series is about character development. It's about Mob's growth as a person. And then to end the series in a way that it feels complete. How can you do that? How can you possibly get to a point where you go, ah, yes, he's grown? It's really hard to not make that seem cheesy, or to make it seem forced, or to make it not seem like, I think I gotta sneeze. That it's, I can't just come from like some external Deus Ex Machina type force. Blam! Okay, now I'm a completely reasonable, well-adjusted person. This adventure is over. It has to come entirely from the heart and be well motivated through all of the lessons that he's learned and stuff. It's really, really hard to do a series like that. And yet here I think it was an uncontested, unequivocated, undeniable success. I felt so happy seeing Mob in the final chapter and thinking about him in contrast to the Mob at the beginning of the series. And not just Mob, too. I feel like one really honored all of the side cast. Reagan and the Telepathy Club president and Ritsu and even people like Dimple and such. Like really, I don't know, you just felt like everybody had come so far, and it was this really beautiful, sentimental ending. I don't know, I can't think of how I would improve the ending. I kind of had a theory that we talked about a few times in the chapter about like Reagan inheriting Mob's powers and such, and blah blah blah, but I don't know. I think this way, I don't know, there's the UFO up here. That's so great. I don't know. I still can't say something that feels complete enough about this series. Like I don't want to let it go. I still feel like there's so much more I want to say about it, but I don't know. Maybe eventually if I do some top manga of all time video that includes it, we can really try to put a nice bow on it. But it's an accomplishment. I think one should really be proud of the story he told here. Like with Watamotei, I think it's one that if you read it at the right time in your life and you're the right sort of person, it could be very, very moving and significant in your personal development. I really believe that, and I believe that someone who reads this series and learns something from it and feels like they've grown as a person through reading it should embrace that feeling, because I think it really does, it makes you a better person reading this series. It's like reading Dostoevsky or something. Yeah, no, I don't even feel that weird about comparing it to Dostoevsky. It's a real story of human growth, which I think is all you can ask for in fiction. Okay, those are my top 5 manga of 2017. But like I said, every series we read last year had their own set of great moments, great memories made. I just love manga so much, guys. I don't even know where to begin. I, being able to share these experiences with you is such a blessing. So thanks so much. Please continue to support my channel. And yeah, and with this, we're finally done 2017 lists. Hooray, hooray, hooray. We can move on to 2018. Okay, bye-bye.